So I'm sitting down today with Tim Roberts, and Tim has one of those careers that's generally hard to sum up in an easy sentence. He qualified as a lawyer and joined a small insurance firm called Badams back in 1987, where he spent his first decade as a commercial litigator acting for insurers. Then, when the senior partners became unsure about the firm's future, Tim led a buyout and set about rebuilding the business. And over the following 10 years, he took a £6 million practice of around 100 people and grew it into a multidisciplinary group of roughly 2,500, turning over close to 160 million. And he did it by tearing up a lot of the old rules about how lawyers and insurers work together. Tim, welcome, and it's great to have you here.
No, thank you, Jonathan.
So I wanted to start with something which is really quite a talking point in the world at the moment. I think there are in the region of sort of 400 to 500 professional services firms in the UK that are now private equity backed. And certainly a lot of senior partners are assessing whether this is the right strategy at the moment. Obviously, back in 2012, the Legal Services Act had only just sort of opened the door to this, and your firm was one of the very first to actually walk through it and take private equity money. So take me back to the moment. What was going on in your business, and what made you decide that this was the right move?
Okay, well, as you said in your kind introduction, we had really significant growth. I guess at the time in our sector, we were probably ahead of our competitors. We'd realized that we were very good at technology and that our insurance clients needed our technology in their businesses as much as it was generating the growth in ours. And so we grew over soft market conditions over a 10-year period. And I think that growth had its challenges with traditional finance. And we also were quite ambitious. We grew not just organically, but through M&A. And we were restricted with traditional financing in terms of the type of M&A that we could do. We were fine with things like successor practices, or where we would take a business's work in progress. In fact, that's how I bought the business originally from the original partners, was to recover that value of their business and pay it out to them over a period of time for a fee, and then you would go forward with that business. But that's not really a model that would fit our buy and build ambitions at the time. And I think lastly, we were quite vested in private equity for many years before the Legal Services Act came in. I think about halfway through that period of growth, we were working with a mid-sized private equity around a structure which we tried to get approval from the regulator even before the Act, which was not possible at the time. And then we went back to the knitting of growing the business until the Act came through. Looking back now, I think we were actually the first private equity-owned business. It's never good to be the first in something, but we'd had huge growth, which had attracted attention. We were a small ownership base. There was 4 owners, and we were in their sweet spot.
Interesting. And I suppose with any sort of major strategic decision, particularly if you're first, there are aspects of it that work extremely well for you and as you expected, and maybe other areas where, with hindsight, you may have wished you'd seen those challenges coming. What sort of were the positives, and what were the areas that potentially the difficulties that you hadn't anticipated?
Well, I think you always tend to focus on the negatives, but there were positives. As I mentioned, we had a buy and build strategy. We'd been working with a couple of competitor firms that were strong in our market with other insurance companies. And in fact, one of them we'd managed to secure a minority stake in even before the private equity transaction. The positive, I guess, in that sense was it gave us the capital to move to a different type of M&A, so we were able to complete the purchase of those 2 firms. It was slightly tinged. The second firm, unfortunately, turned out not to be a good acquisition. Not necessarily their fault. The insurance market is highly competitive, and one of their principal clients didn't like the merger, and that gave us a difficulty with our leverage covenants, unfortunately, later. But at that time, the positives really were that we were able to complete the first stage, if you like, of our buy and build strategy. And that was a positive. I suppose the other positive for the two of the four, if you like to take that moment, two founders stayed on, myself and Tim, and the other two retired. And so it achieved restructuring of the management team. So it allowed us to change the management team of the business. And there were more challenges, unfortunately, and not because of private equity necessarily, but we were a little bit naive as to what a leveraged buyout meant. We were highly leveraged, which was later to cause us problems in terms of the flexibility and indeed allowing us to raise capital. And so I guess in that sense, it didn't help. Also, and this is typical, we'd worked with a particular investor director for a number of years leading up to this point. He knew the business intimately and was really, really motivated about what we were doing. And unfortunately, he left almost as soon as the deal closed. It took about a year, even after, say, probably a year and a half of due diligence, another year between exchange and completion. And I think even in that year, you could see that on the horizon, the risk profile of the business was changing. Reforms were coming in that affected our legal expense business. And so in a sense, it was a really strange period of a year in running the business, not knowing whether actually it would complete or not. So at the grassroots level, the finance function inevitably was going to change. You can't do a private equity transaction without a new CFO. What I hadn't expected was that we would lose our finance directors in the various divisions of the business, and therefore we lost a lot of key knowledge. So that was a challenge. And I think also just the shock, actually, of eventually going forward onto a private equity board. Although we had a long time to think about it over that period before we were regulated, actually, and I think this is typical of many deals, the deal fatigue on both sides had set in. And I think when that happens, there's a danger that you don't do the 90-day plan or the 365 plan, and you don't perhaps think about what they want from a board member, because it's totally different to your partnership with the three other chaps I was in business with. So you need to know how to produce a board report, which I had to learn. And then I was spending a lot of time explaining the moving parts of what happens with that type of business and extrapolating that into the numbers that they were all over.
Is a common issue voiced for any private equity-backed company, is around a culture clash, is around not necessarily understanding the industry. And obviously professional services is different with its partnership model. And you were a test case for these investors, having not worked in that area before. What is it you think they didn't understand before about how a law firm functions?
I would say that by the time they'd completed the due diligence, which was extensive, they had a deep financial understanding of the business. And they loved the recurring revenue, which is why these law firms are, I guess, popular. They understood the business, I think, in the sense of the contracts that we had with some very big insurance companies. And they knew that we needed to focus on client concentration, for example, that we were too big with some insurance companies. But they didn't really ever engage or understand the dynamic that actually, irrespective of the contracts, the value was the partners and their teams. So if you don't look after those partners, and if you're not able to look after those teams, or they feel that the business is different and let's say they leave, then that affects the value of your business, because all these contracts really are the framework for us to do a whole host of different things for them. And so that was the challenge for me, was continually having to explain what's happening in relation to people in the business and how that's manifesting itself in the numbers. The other thing which was very true of the insurance market, and I imagine still is today, is the vulnerability that law firms have with their clients. We had a very aggressive procurement teams. I hope they won't mind me saying that, but they were very skilled in ensuring that they got more for their pound of flesh. At the end of the day, the business is built on the trust that's developed between the lawyers and their clients. You start as a lawyer and you're 20 something and you progress and you form the relationships within the framework of your firm's clients, and you effectively grow old together. You develop expertise and knowledge. So if you disturb that ecosystem because you want to take cost out of the business, it is difficult to do. And if we start saying, well, we're not interested in what we used to call the tall forehead type work, the higher quality work, because it's not as profitable, then it's difficult to make those changes. So I think, as you probably surmised, they were on as much a learning curve around owning a law firm as we were around being on a management team with private equity.
Would there be other advice that you would give to people looking at this for things that you learn from your experience?
Yeah, I think the obvious is you've got to choose the right private equity firm. I guess looking back, we probably could have done with more advice. I don't just mean to the people handling the transaction, but to the partners that were going to be affected by this transaction. I suppose making sure that what the structure of what they're bringing, the access to capital is there. We went with a private equity which at the time hadn't raised a new fund, which meant that we were at the end of an existing fund with a number of other investee companies within that fund. That is not a great place to be if you need some capital because your EBITDA is changing and you need to restructure some debt in the business, etc. So that is an important understanding. Another one, I think, which was true for us, was communication internally. It is so disruptive, these processes around due diligence. And what tends to happen is that you get a small team together that spend all their time doing the due diligence for, let's say, a year or however long it takes. And what can happen is that the people in that environment don't communicate everything back to the partners that aren't in transaction. And the PE starts to see the business through the lens of the people that's in that room, which is fine if they know every aspect of the business, but generally they don't.
Is that ensuring that they have access to a wider group of partners of which to question and to learn? Or is that making sure that the small group makes sure all the partners are on the journey?
Yeah, but as the process goes on, they spend more and more money. So the pressure becomes back to this deal fatigue point. We need to get this done. I suppose it relates to this point, which is you started the process with a set objective to achieve. Don't compromise on that objective. Don't get, ask yourself which I wish we had done, down the line, are we fulfilling the things that we wanted to fulfill? Is this going to be a steady state for us, stability in terms of what we want to achieve? Or are we making compromises like we did around the level of the debt, for example, and thinking about actually how would that go if we lost a client or two, or if those risks that we're concerned about? And I think the other thing is, if it's a buy and build, as our strategy was, be clear on what you're going to do with the money. Have a plan, really work through. That bit, I think, in part we got right. And then I suppose finally, obviously, you've got to have a strong management team. You probably need to think about, if you need a new CEO, you'd be better off getting one in and under the table before the transaction. And then I suppose it's a 90-day plan. There is a book out, actually, a 90-day plan. That's the name of the book. It's a good book.
Yeah, funny enough, I've read it.
I'm doing, there was a McKinsey report out recently about 40% of new CEOs failing in the first 18 months. And in REF, which peer advisory, we're looking at having a 90-day peer advisory for those two CEOs because they're out there on their own trying to figure out how to grow these businesses and they need help. But as I say, I guess we were the guinea pig for the industry of private equity, and so we were typically going to fall off the hamster wheel in that sense.
And very interesting to think. And I think there's probably still a lot of relevance, even after all the deals that there are, to the journey that you went through and what people don't anticipate. You mentioned REF, so let's bring it up to date, because after your extensive career in the legal world, you took some time out. And then you found REF, where you're now a partner. Give us a quick view on, what it actually does and how it works in practice.
Okay, so it's a 30-year-old business. It's a global business. So it's founded in North America, and it dominates in South America and in 22 different countries. We've got about 3,500 CEOs globally. And my partner and I have the franchise for the UK, and we started in London. And what it is effectively I, as a forum leader, have 10 CEOs that meet monthly in Chatsworth House rules, strictly confidential. It's a safe place for them to talk about things that are affecting their life, not just their business, but them as individuals. And then they will bring to these forums a case. It's a business dilemma. It's something that's really important to them that they can't share with other board members because it will cause concern. Effectively, the group is from different sectors. They put on their experienced rubber gloves, and we delve into that business dilemma. And that is what is a collective intelligence is about, because effectively what they're doing is all 10 of them are saying, including me, if I was in your shoes, this is what I would do. If I may say this, is the Americans is a rather cheesy metaphor for REF, which is this gigantic telescope apparently in Chile, which has antennae that's all pointing at different distances and different directions. But they are able to integrate and have a comprehensive image that no single telescope could ever do. And they liken their members to antennae because they can see the opportunities collectively and the risks and the dangers. And that's why they come. And so for me, it's a bittersweet thing that I do, because the bitter part of me is so wish I could have had access to this when I was making those decisions. The sweet bit is that I have the skills to help make a difference, to facilitate these discussions.
Absolutely.
So that some of these CEOs, business leaders, founders, etc., are hopefully making the better and helping them evolve to be better leaders and perhaps better people.
So if there's anyone sort of in senior leadership positions who wants to find out more, or even if there's anyone who's had a good long business career who may be interested in working on the mentoring side, where should they go to find out more?
Well, I guess the starting point is the website, REF Global, or you're interested in finding people like me that perhaps are in transition, wanting to do something different with their careers. We're growing, and we need like-minded people to help us do that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you overall. Thank you for being so candid about the journey, your thoughts and your experiences to people who may find themselves in the midst of this or potentially about to step into. I think it'll be fascinating for them. And thank you for sharing it so openly.
No, pleasure, Jonathan. Good to talk to you today.
Thank you.